And now for my final guest of the afternoon, I'm pleased to introduce the Honorable Frank Kendall, the 26th Secretary of the Air Force. I was able to speak with him last week, just hours after Russian jets downed a U.S. drone over the Black Sea. We spoke about that, as well as other news broke, as well as other issues and priorities important to the U.S. Air Force. Take a listen to my interview. Secretary Kendall, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you, Bob. Thank you.
Well, we've got some breaking news that's just happened, and this involves an Air Force drone that has been apparently knocked down by Russian jets. Can you tell us a little bit more about this event?
I can tell you what I know, and I think it's pretty much what the commander has provided. We were conducting a routine surveillance operation in the Black Sea, and Russian aircraft with very unsafe practices interfere with the flight of the aircraft and cause it to crash. I mean, that's the short version of this. We're looking into the details of that and trying to understand exactly what happened.
And is this, just as a quick follow-up, is this highly unusual, especially if it's over the Black Sea? That's over international waters, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The MQ-9, our aircraft, a drone, unmanned drone, was in international waters conducting a routine flight. And this is extremely unusual. I'm not aware of an incident like this that's occurred, over the last year of conflict over there.
Okay. Other news, certainly, of the month and going forward into the spring is the budget season. Can you talk about the Air Force's proposed budget and why it's important? Remember, there are some in the Democratic Party and some in the Republican Party who want to cut defense spending, but there are a lot of threats around the world. Why is it important for Congress to approve this request?
The main reason is because of the threat and the need to move as quickly as possible to keep pace with the threat. I'm back in government basically because I'm concerned about primarily our facing challenges, military modernization program. That's China, People's Republic of China, of course. I've been concerned about this for over a dozen years now. They've been investing very heavily in systems which are intended to defeat the American ability to project power in the Russian Pacific, as well as expanding their military generally around the world in a number of different fronts. But a primary concern to me from the point of view of the Air Force and the Space Force is the increasing range of threats to our ability to project power and to protect the joint force.
Now, some critics of the administration have said, who are backers of more defense spending, have said, well, if inflation high, asking for a 3% jump in Pentagon spending, that's not enough. What do you say to that?
We got a pretty large increase in our budget in FY23, so we're adding on to that increase which has already taken place. For the Department of the Air Force, our increase is a little over 5%. And the Space Force is even higher than that. The Air Force is slightly lower. The increases we're getting are going to take care of the things that we need the most to move forward, to modernize, to transform really both the Air and the Space Force into the forces we're going to need going forward. Now, I'm very comfortable about the level of budget we have. We are looking at the risk between the near term, the far term, and so on. And I'm prioritizing to some degree the investments we need in modernization. But I'm comfortable with the other parts of the budget and what they finance.
You've mentioned modernization, and in a recent speech, you really leaned into that. But what does that mean? We have a vast audience. I'm not a defense expert. Can you describe it in a way that we can all understand?
Sure. The force structure that we have in space and for the Air Force is essentially the one we've had for quite a long time. We have fighter planes, we have bombers. In space, we have satellites that provide various services to us. But what China recognized, going back maybe 30 years, is that the U.S. depends upon a small number of high-value assets in order to project combat power forward. The things on that list include, first of all, aircraft carriers, of course, but forward air bases, in which we have a relatively small number. And then a relatively small number of satellites in orbit in very predictable paths. So China's been acquiring the means to attack all of those assets and others, such as key logistics nodes or command and control nodes. So they feel that a lot of missiles of various ranges, increasingly going out to longer ranges, to attack all of those assets. They've also been modernizing their conventional forces in order to take us on in some of the areas that we depended upon for a long time, like stealth, for example. They've been fielding hypersonic weapons as well, which are very difficult to intercept. So there are a range of things that have happened on the threat side that have put us at risk, and we have got to respond to that. And those require some pretty fundamental changes in some cases.
We live in interesting times, and recently, of course, we had the China spy balloon and then other objects that were shot out of the sky. What are the lessons learned? It's been a little while since that turbulent time. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, it was an interesting exercise, and I think it brought home, I think, to the American people very visibly that we do have competitors in the world and that they are capable of taking actions against us. The surveillance balloon, which was a Chinese surveillance balloon, does not pose a high threat to the United States. But it made, I think, for the American public, it made it very visible that we do have an adversary who's willing to take that kind of an operation against us in order to collect information. You know, not that much higher in altitude than the balloon are the satellites that are going over our heads all the time, but they're not as visible. And the other threats that I mentioned earlier are out there too, and are inimical to our interests, and we have to respond to those. So I think that in a sense that the balloon was made that much more apparent, that we have that problem to worry about. The balloons per se are not, however, that much of a threat to the country.
Are we going to get more information on the balloon, because transparency in these kind of situations is very important, educating the public? A lot of people were very frightened by what they saw in the air.
What I think we put out publicly is it was a surveillance balloon. We're confident of that. We have some pretty good information about what was on. We did, as I think it's also been made public, try to recover some of the debris from the balloon that we shot down. I don't see any reason personally why we shouldn't make that information public as we have it. Let people know. The Chinese already know, obviously, what was on their balloon, and they know how we got access to it. So I don't think there's any reason why we can't be fairly forthcoming about what types of sensors and what we think that they were looking for in terms of information.
As far as technology, you know, just generally speaking, over the last 50 years, it's been remarkable of where we've come. What can you say about what kind of gets you excited about technology in the military sense and where we're going in the next 5 to 15, 20 years? I know some things you can't say, but what can you say?
No, there are a number of areas in which we can take advantage of emerging technologies and move forward. I can start with commercial space technologies. They're going to give us the opportunity to have much less expensive and more proliferated and more survivable space architectures. Artificial intelligence, various facets of artificial intelligence, machine learning, pattern recognition, data analytics are going to be valuable to us as we try to sort through massive amounts of information and draw conclusions from it and decide more efficiently and effectively what kind of action to take on our own part. There are a number of things in the area of autonomy in particular, and artificial intelligence contributes to that, where we'll be able to take human beings out of some of the high-risk situations we'd had to put them in previously. One of my initiatives in the budget is an uncrewed collaborative combat aircraft, which is essentially an uncrewed drone that flies with a fighter. There may be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of these per fighter airplane, and that they're used to make that fighter much, much more capable, expand on his capabilities, and give him a small formation, if you will, to control, to affect whatever he's trying to affect against an adversary. So there are a number of things like that that are making things possible for us. The whole area of communications and command and control, battle management is another one. There are emerging sensors that are changing the game as well. So there's a wide array of technologies. What we have to do is seize upon which of those technologies have the greatest opportunity for us, and then figure out how to put them into an operational application as efficiently and effectively as possible. We spent much of the last year working our way through some of those problems, and the budget we just submitted, now asks for the money to move forward and apply those technologies to the threat that I talked about. So it's critically important to us that we get timely passage of both authorizations and appropriations this year. We need that money, but even more, we need the authority to start doing those things so we can get things fielded as quickly as possible.
Have you been frustrated, in passing defense bills used to be easier? They used to be more bipartisan. We live in polarizing times, and what you've just talked about is that the defense budget is going to be quite a battle, honestly. Is that concerning going forward?
Our defense bills have been pretty bipartisan, actually. We've had pretty good cooperation between Republicans and Democrats about both our authorization bill and our appropriations bill. There are always some issues that we end up arguing about, trying to sort out. And there have been delays. It's become routine to have about a 3-month delay at least in the passing of these bills. But within the defense committees, I'm fortunate, I guess, to be able to work in an environment in which people on both sides of the aisle care a lot about national security and are reasonably knowledgeable about the threats and what we need to do about them. So I'm not terribly worried about our committees, at least on the fundamental content of the defense enterprise, funding the things that we need to do. But I am very worried in the political environment we have in general about getting bills passed this year.
Jay Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, says that the threat of cyber keeps him up at night. What keeps you up at night?
Well, cyber's certainly on the list. What I worry about most is time. I started my posture hearings for the Congress last year with a quote from MacArthur to the effect that military failure can almost always be summed up in 2 words: too late. I'm concerned about us being too late to make the changes that we need to make. And part of that, of course, is getting the funding and then getting on with the research and development we need to do and then fielding things. But it all starts with getting the funding.
And you've been in this field 50 years. Just last question on this is just, obviously the defense industry has changed so much, the threats have changed so much. But, for the next generation, what should we be doing? And obviously you just referred to it as not be reactionary, but to act first.
Yeah, my first 20 years of my career, you're reminding me how old I am, but the first 20 years of my career were in the Cold War. And I worried about the Soviet Union. And I worried about their attempts to defeat us, modernize their forces in a way that would be effective against us. So I know what it's like to have a peer competitor. And then we spent about 30 years with American dominance and dealing with counterinsurgency, counterterrorism. And now I think it's more generally recognized that we're back into a strategic competition. We're in a race for military technological superiority, and we have got to move quickly in that race. It's not an arms race where we're trying to build more battleships than the other guy. It's really more about applying technology as quickly and as effectively as possible to get more efficient ways to conduct military operations. And so that's what I'm about, and that's what keeps me up at night. The need to make the right decisions and move forward as quickly as possible.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Bob. Good to talk to you.
Thanks again to Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall. That brings us to the end of our program. A big thank you to GE Aerospace for their support and to all of you for watching. For those who missed any of these conversations this afternoon, we will have video from the event on our website, thehill.com, shortly. I'm Bob Cusack. Have a great rest of your day.